The wagon wheels had given out 3 miles back, leaving Sarah Mitchell with nothing but her worn leather satchel and the burning Dakota sun overhead. Her calico dress, once blue as morning sky, now bore the dust of 2 weeks' travel from Illinois. She'd come west to marry Thomas Henley, a man she'd known only through letters, but his homestead was still miles away according to the crude map he'd sent. The creek she'd been following had led her onto unfamiliar land, rolling prairie that stretched endlessly, broken only by a cluster of cottonwood trees and what appeared to be a small cabin in the distance. Sarah's parched throat made the decision for her tired mind. She needed water, and surely no Christian soul would deny a traveler a drink. She knelt by the creek's edge, cupping the cool water in her hands, when the sound of hoofbeats made her freeze. 3 riders emerged from behind the cabin, their faces hard as the Dakota stone. The leader, a barrel-chested man with a graying beard, dismounted with the deliberate slowness of someone accustomed to being feared. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd carved his place in this territory with violence. "What have we here? A little trespasser drinking from my creek." Sarah stood slowly, water dripping from her trembling hands. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm traveling to the Henley homestead. I only needed—" "Henley?" The man's eyes narrowed. "Tom Henley's dead, girl. Died of fever 2 weeks past. Which means you're trespassing on land that reverts to me, Jeremiah Cobb." He gestured to the vast expanse around them. "This is my range now, and I don't take kindly to thieves." "I'm no thief," Sarah protested, her voice stronger than she felt. "I was to be his wife. I have letters." "Letters don't mean nothing when the man's 6 feet under." Cobb's companions chuckled, but there was no warmth in the sound. "You drank from my creek, walked on my land. That's stealing in my book." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd heard stories of frontier justice, swift, harsh, and often final. "Please, I'll leave immediately. I meant no harm." Cobb studied her for a long moment, his weathered face revealing nothing. "Oh, you'll leave, all right. But not before you learn what happens to thieves in my territory." He nodded to his men. "Rope." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. She turned to run, but the prairie offered no shelter, no sanctuary. The men were on horseback, and she was already exhausted from her journey. They caught her easily, her desperate flight lasting only moments before rough hands seized her arms. "The old cottonwood by the creek," Cobb ordered. "Let her think about respect for other people's property." As they bound her wrists with coarse rope, Sarah felt the last of her civilized world slipping away. The tree they chose was ancient, its bark scarred by wind and weather, standing like a sentinel over the flowing water that had drawn her to this fate. The rope bit into her skin as they secured her to the trunk, her arms pulled behind her around the massive tree. "We'll be back tomorrow," Cobb said, mounting his horse. "Assuming the coyotes don't get you first. Maybe then you'll understand the price of trespassing." As their hoofbeats faded into the distance, Sarah was left alone with the whisper of wind through prairie grass and the mockingly cheerful babble of the creek. The sun, which had been merciless during her journey, now seemed to be racing toward the horizon, promising a night filled with unknown terrors. She tested her bonds, but the rope held fast. The bark pressed rough against her back, and already she could feel the circulation slowing in her hands. This was to be her punishment for seeking water, for trusting in basic human decency. As the first shadows began to lengthen across the prairie, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's voice, her father's prayers, anything that might give her strength for the ordeal ahead. The Dakota Territory was teaching her its first harsh lesson. Mercy was a luxury few could afford in this unforgiving land. The sun hung like a brass coin in the western sky, and Sarah's throat felt lined with sand. Hours had passed since Cobb and his men had left her bound to the cottonwood, and the ropes had grown tighter as the wood absorbed the moisture from her skin. Her shoulders ached from the unnatural position, and her legs trembled with the effort of keeping herself upright. She'd tried everything, twisting her wrists until they bled, attempting to work her way around the tree, even trying to climb up to find a thinner section of trunk. Nothing worked. The rope was secure, the knots professional, the tree as unmovable as the horizon itself. As the afternoon stretched on, Sarah's mind wandered to the letters she'd exchanged with Thomas Henley. His careful handwriting had painted pictures of a good life, a cabin by a creek, fertile land, the promise of children and a future far from the crowded, smoky cities of the East. She'd sold everything she owned for passage west, carrying nothing but her few possessions and dreams of a fresh start. Now those dreams seemed as distant as the Illinois prairie she'd left behind. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else, smoke from a distant fire. Sarah's heart leaped with hope. Perhaps someone lived nearby, someone who might help her. She called out, her voice hoarse but determined. "Hello. Please, someone help me." Her words were swallowed by the vast emptiness. The only response came from a red-tailed hawk circling overhead, its cry sharp and lonely in the afternoon air. As the sun continued its descent, Sarah noticed movement in the distance, a rider approaching along the creek. For a moment, her heart soared. Perhaps it was a neighbor, a decent man who would free her from this nightmare. But as the figure drew closer, her relief turned to apprehension. The rider was an Indian, moving with the fluid grace of someone born to the saddle. His long black hair was braided with leather and feathers, and his painted pony picked its way carefully along the creek bank. Sarah had heard terrible stories about the Lakota, tales of raids and warfare that had filled the newspapers back east. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized that her situation might have just become far worse. The warrior, for that's what he clearly was, stopped his horse about 30 yards away. He sat motionless for several minutes, studying her with dark eyes that revealed nothing. Sarah found herself unable to look away, caught between fear and a strange sense of being truly seen for the first time in her life. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his 20s, with strong features and a bearing that spoke of both confidence and caution. His buckskin shirt was decorated with intricate beadwork, and he carried a rifle across his lap with the easy familiarity of a man who'd learned to survive in a hostile world. Finally, he dismounted and approached on foot, his moccasins silent on the prairie grass. Sarah's heart hammered so hard she was certain he could hear it. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Please." He stopped just out of arm's reach, his eyes moving from her face to the ropes, to the tracks left by Cobb's horses. When he spoke, his English was careful but clear, touched with an accent that spoke of a language far older than the settlements scattered across the Dakota Territory. Who did this? The question was so simple, so direct, that Sarah found herself answering before she could think. A man named Cobb. Jeremiah Cobb. He said I was trespassing, drinking from his creek. The warrior's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Cobb. The name carried weight when he spoke it, as if it tasted bitter on his tongue. "Do you know him?" Sarah asked, hope flickering in her chest. "I know him." The warrior walked slowly around the tree, examining the ropes with the attention of someone who understood such things. "He kills the buffalo for their hides, leaves the meat to rot. He burns the prairie to drive away the elk. He is—" He paused, searching for the English word. "Wasteful. Cruel." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Will you help me?" The warrior stopped in front of her again, his gaze steady and measuring. "Why should I help a Wassaku, a white woman who comes to take more land?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Sarah had no answer that wouldn't sound hollow, no justification that wouldn't ring false. She was a stranger in this land, part of a tide of settlers that had already changed the territory forever. All she could offer was the truth. "Because I have nowhere else to go," she said quietly. "Because I'm alone and afraid, and because I think you're a good man." The warrior studied her for a long moment, and Sarah thought she saw something shift in his expression. A recognition, perhaps, or an understanding that transcended the differences between their peoples. The sun was sinking lower now, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, and the first evening stars were beginning to appear. As if making a decision, the warrior reached for the knife at his belt. Sarah's breath caught, uncertain of his intentions, but his movements were careful and deliberate as he approached the tree. The blade was sharp, its edge honed to perfection, and as he began to work at the ropes, Sarah felt the first stirrings of hope she'd experienced since her ordeal began. The knife moved with practiced precision, and Sarah felt the first rope give way. Blood rushed back into her hands, bringing with it a painful tingling that was nonetheless welcome. The warrior worked in silence, his movements efficient and careful, occasionally glancing toward the horizon as if watching for riders. "What's your name?" Sarah asked softly, afraid to break the spell of his kindness. "Dakota," he replied without looking up. "It means friend to everyone, though some would say that is no longer true. I'm Sarah Mitchell." She winced as another rope loosened, her shoulders protesting as they moved for the first time in hours. "From Illinois." "Illinois," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Far from the great water." When the last rope fell away, Sarah stumbled forward, her legs weak from maintaining the same position for so long. Dakota caught her arm, steadying her with a gentle strength that spoke of careful control. "Sit," he said, guiding her to a fallen log near the creek. "You need water." He produced a leather water bag from his horse and handed it to her. Sarah drank deeply, the cool water like a blessing on her parched throat. As she drank, Dakota examined her wrists, his touch surprisingly gentle as he assessed the rope burns. "You will heal," he said simply. "But we must go. Cobb will return, and he will not be pleased to find you gone." Sarah looked up at him, confusion clear in her eyes. "We." Dakota was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "My grandmother once told me that mercy is like a seed. It must be planted to grow. She said that kindness given to strangers returns to us when we need it most." He looked at her directly then, his dark eyes serious. "Perhaps it is time to plant seeds." "But I'm a stranger," Sarah protested. "A white woman. Your people and mine are not at war in this moment," Dakota interrupted. "In this moment, you are a woman who needs help, and I am a man who can give it. Tomorrow may bring different choices, but tonight—" He gestured toward the darkening sky. "Tonight, we live by the old ways. By honor." Sarah felt tears threaten again, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. "Where will we go?" "There is a place," Dakota said, helping her to her feet. "A cabin, abandoned but safe. The man who built it was fair in his dealings with my people. He is gone now, but his shelter remains." As they prepared to leave, Sarah gathered her scattered belongings, her satchel, the precious letters from Thomas Henley, her mother's small silver locket. Dakota watched her carefully, his expression thoughtful. "The man you came to marry," he said as she climbed onto his horse behind him. "Thomas Henley. He was a good man." "You knew him?" "We traded sometimes. He gave fair prices for pelts, never tried to cheat or drive hard bargains. When the fever took him, he asked me to watch over his land, to make sure Cobb did not simply take it." Dakota's voice carried a note of sadness. "I failed in that promise." Sarah felt a pang of loss for the man she'd never met, the life she'd never have. "He sounds like he was decent." "He was," Dakota agreed. "He spoke of you often in his last days. Said you were brave to come so far to marry a stranger." As they rode through the gathering dusk, Sarah found herself leaning against Dakota's strong back, drawing comfort from his warmth and the steady rhythm of his horse's gait. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, but somehow it no longer seemed as hostile or empty as it had before. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. "Really?" Dakota was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost lost in the wind. "Because my sister once married a white man," he said. "A good man, like Thomas Henley. But when the soldiers came to their homestead, they did not see her husband's kindness or her love. They saw only Indians and whites living together, and they—" He paused, his shoulders tense. "They killed them both." Sarah's heart clenched. "I'm sorry." Her name was Ayanna. It means eternal flower. She believed that people could learn to live together, that kindness could bridge the gap between our peoples. Dakota's voice grew stronger. Perhaps she was naive. Perhaps she was foolish. But she died believing it, and I. He turned slightly, meeting Sarah's eyes. "I will not let her hope die with her." The cabin appeared as full darkness fell, a small structure set in a grove of cottonwoods near a bend in the creek. It was humble but solid, built by hands that knew their craft. Dakota helped Sarah down from his horse, and together they entered the abandoned home. Moonlight streamed through the windows, illuminating a simple interior, a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, a bed frame with a corn-husk mattress. It was sparse but clean, as if someone had been caring for it in the owner's absence. "You've been taking care of this place," Sarah realized. Dakota nodded. "Thomas asked me to. He hoped." He shrugged. "He hoped many things." As Sarah settled onto the bed, exhaustion finally claiming her, she watched Dakota build a small fire in the fireplace. The flames danced and flickered, casting warm shadows on the walls, and for the first time since leaving Illinois, she felt truly safe. "Thank you," she whispered as sleep began to take her. "Sleep well, Sarah Mitchell," Dakota replied softly. "Tomorrow we decide what comes next." Dawn brought Jeremiah Cobb and his men to the cabin, surrounding it with drawn weapons. They'd tracked Sarah and Dakota through the night, fury burning in their eyes. Cobb demanded his frontier justice, insisting Sarah must pay for her supposed crime of drinking from his creek. Dakota stood firm in the doorway, rifle ready, facing 3 armed men with quiet dignity. When Sarah stepped outside to prevent bloodshed, the confrontation reached its breaking point. Cobb raised his weapon, calling Dakota a redskin with venomous hatred. Just as violence seemed inevitable, U.S. cavalry appeared through the morning mist. Captain Morrison, recognizing Thomas Henley's name and seeing Sarah's rope burns, quickly understood the truth. He arrested Cobb for attempted murder, declaring that leaving a woman tied to a tree for drinking water was criminal, not justice. As the cavalry rode away with their prisoners, Sarah and Dakota found themselves alone by the creek where their story began. She decided to stay in Dakota Territory, seeing possibility in this harsh but honest land. Dakota spoke of his grandmother's wisdom about planting seeds of mercy, and Sarah realized they could build something new together, a different kind of frontier family. Standing beneath the infinite prairie sky, they began to plant the seeds of a future built on understanding rather than conquest, where the creek would flow freely for all who needed it, regardless of their origins or beliefs.